And early 2025, the world's longest undefended border, stretching over 5,500 miles between the United States and Canada, became the unlikely epicenter of a new and rapidly escalating conflict. But this wasn't a clash of armies or a standoff of tanks. Instead, it was a battle fought with tariffs, trade restrictions, and economic threats. The familiar peace and cooperation that had defined the border for generations suddenly gave way to tension and uncertainty as both nations braced for impact. The spark came when Washington imposed sweeping tariffs on Canadian goods, citing national security concerns and the need to protect American industries. In a swift and decisive move, Canada hit back at the U.S. with a staggering $103 billion retaliation package. The announcement, made in front of a tense parliament and broadcast across the nation, sent a clear message. Canada would not stand by while its economy was threatened. The retaliation package targeted a wide range of American exports, from agricultural products to manufactured goods, and marked one of the largest trade countermeasures in modern history. This wasn't just a diplomatic spat, it was a seismic escalation that sent shockwaves through the global economy. Stock markets from Toronto to New York plunged as investors scrambled to assess the fallout. Shipping ports grew congested with goods suddenly subject to new tariffs, and factory assembly lines ground to a halt as supply chains were thrown into chaos overnight. The world watched as two of its largest trading partners squared off, uncertain of what would come next. At the heart of Canada's response was a bold move, targeting the oil and energy sector, a critical artery for both economies. By imposing new restrictions and tariffs on American energy imports and exports, Canada signaled that it was prepared to defend its interests with equal force. Energy industry workers braced for layoffs, and oil companies scrambled to reroute shipments, knowing that the stakes had never been higher. The immediate aftermath was felt on trading floors and in boardrooms across North America. Stock markets tumbled, businesses scrambled to adapt, and the shockwaves quickly spread beyond the continent. Small business owners worried about rising costs and shrinking markets, while multinational corporations faced the daunting task of reworking their global supply chains. The uncertainty was palpable, and the sense of crisis grew with each passing day. Suddenly, the effects of the trade war were no longer confined to government offices or corporate boardrooms. Everyday life was caught in the crossfire. Gas prices soared at the pump, grocery store shelves emptied as imports slowed, and families across both countries faced the grim reality of layoffs and rising bills. The economic conflict had become personal, touching the lives of millions who had never imagined being swept up in a trade dispute. The trade war was no longer an abstract policy debate or a distant headline. It was a crisis hitting home for millions. Protests erupted in cities on both sides of the border, news outlets ran non-stop coverage of the unfolding trade crisis, and families everywhere wondered how long the turmoil would last. As the world watched, the question remained: could this economic conflict be contained, or was it just the beginning of something much bigger? The spark. In February, the Trump administration slapped a 25% tariff on all Canadian and Mexican imports, and 10% on Canadian oil. The official reason: national security and stopping drug flows. Claims met with skepticism in Ottawa. Trudeau, in his final days as PM, called out the U.S. for blaming Canada for fentanyl, a charge with little basis. The tariffs, seen as economic bullying, took effect March 4th, triggering outrage and a sense of betrayal among allies. Washington's message was clear: the old rules were gone, and economic might would dictate policy. For Canada, this was an existential threat, one that demanded a forceful response. NATO's answer to the escalating trade dispute was not just quick. It was calculated, deliberate, and designed to send a clear message to Washington and the world. Within days of the U.S. announcement, Canadian officials convened in Ottawa, determined to show that Canada would not be bullied or caught off guard. The government's response was crafted to maximize both economic and political impact, ensuring that every move would be felt not just in boardrooms, but also in the heartland of America. The centerpiece of this response was a massive $155 billion CAD retaliation package, carefully structured and rolled out in two distinct waves. This wasn't a knee-jerk reaction, it was a playbook move, designed to escalate pressure while leaving room for negotiation. The first wave hit fast, a 25% tariff slapped on $30 billion worth of U.S. goods. The list was no accident. Products like peanut butter, furniture, and household staples were chosen for their ties to key American industries and swing states. By targeting goods from the Midwest and South, Canada aimed to create political headaches for US lawmakers, making sure the pain was felt where it mattered most. But the real threat lay in the second wave, which loomed even larger. If the US refused to back down, Canada was prepared to extend tariffs to the auto and energy sectors, industries deeply intertwined across the border. This escalation would not only disrupt supply chains but also threaten thousands of jobs on both sides, raising the stakes dramatically. This staged approach was a high-stakes gamble. By rolling out retaliation in phases, Canada gave the US a critical window to reconsider and de-escalate, while signaling its own resolve. Behind closed doors, negotiators watched the clock, knowing that every hour without resolution increased the risk of lasting economic damage. Ontario, Canada's industrial powerhouse, quickly joined the effort. The province imposed new taxes on electricity exports to US states, leveraging its role as a key energy supplier. This move sent a jolt through American utilities and businesses, highlighting just how interconnected and vulnerable the cross-border relationship had become. In addition, Canada banned American firms from bidding on government contracts, shutting out US companies from lucrative infrastructure and public service projects. This not only hurt American business interests but also signaled that Canada was willing to use every tool at its disposal. The message was unmistakable. Canada stood united, with politicians from all parties rallying together. The government made it clear that the pain would only intensify until the US relented, and that Canada was prepared for a prolonged standoff if necessary. As the measures took effect, the North American economy teetered on a knife's edge. Markets grew jittery, supply chains slowed, and business leaders on both sides of the border braced for impact. The stakes had never been higher. Now, with both nations locked in a tense standoff, the world watched and waited. Would either side blink, or would this economic showdown spiral into something even more damaging? The next move would shape the future of North American trade for years to come. The real battleground? Oil. The US tariffed Canadian oil, its largest foreign supply, throwing refineries into chaos. American refineries built for Alberta's heavy crude couldn't easily switch sources, facing huge costs or passing them to consumers. Oil prices dipped globally, but US refineries paid more for Canadian crude, driving up regional fuel costs. The tariffs exposed a deep vulnerability in US energy security, risking supply and spiking prices. New England governors warned of billion-dollar losses. Analysts called it a self-inflicted wound. The move hurt American consumers as much as Canadian producers. For ordinary people, the trade war hit fast and hard. Gas prices jumped 20-40 cents per gallon in the Midwest and Northeast, costing families more at every fill-up. Supermarkets saw price hikes on produce and staples, while retailers warned of rising costs for electronics and clothing. The auto industry, reliant on cross-border parts, faced production cuts, up to 20,000 vehicles a day at risk. Analysts warned of $40 billion in losses for US automakers, threatening jobs in key states. Small businesses and factory workers faced layoffs and uncertainty. The trade war was no longer a headline, it was a daily struggle for millions. Economic stability had vanished almost overnight. Politically, the trade war united Canada and divided the US-Canadian leaders across parties, backed tough retaliation, with some calling for even harsher measures. In the US, the administration defended the tariffs, but many lawmakers, especially from border states, warned of disaster. Public opinion split. Canadians rallied behind Buy Canadian campaigns, willing to endure hardship for sovereignty. In the US, some cheered America first, but many, especially farmers and factory workers, feared for their livelihoods. Social media campaigns and protests erupted on both sides. The trade war became a test of national resolve and political leadership. For many, it was no longer about policy, it was about survival. The conflict quickly went global. Mexico, hit with the same tariffs, announced its own retaliation, refusing to bow to US pressure. China, already in a trade war with the US, raised tariffs on American goods and blacklisted US companies. Canada faced a two-front war as China also targeted Canadian exports in response to earlier disputes. The European Union braced for new US tariffs, fearing a transatlantic trade war. What began as a North American dispute spiraled into a worldwide contagion of protectionism. The global supply chain was suddenly at risk. The economic fallout was immediate. Stock markets plunged, erasing billions in value and rattling investors. Job losses loomed, especially in manufacturing, energy, and agriculture. The auto sector faced shutdowns, factories couldn't get parts, and layoffs began. Both Canada and the US teetered on the edge of recession, with consumer spending and business investment grinding to a halt. The tariffs acted as a massive tax, choking the once vibrant North American economy. The threat of a deep downturn was now very real. As of July 1, 2025, the world stands at a crossroads. The choices made in the coming weeks and months will shape not only the global economy, but the lives of millions of people across continents. The air is thick with uncertainty, and every decision carries enormous weight. Governments, businesses, and ordinary citizens alike are bracing for what comes next, knowing that the stakes have never been higher. The trade war's next moves depend on whether leaders can find a way to de-escalate. Behind closed doors, diplomats and negotiators are working around the clock, searching for common ground. The world watches as leaders weigh the costs of confrontation against the benefits of compromise. Every handshake, every statement, and every policy shift is scrutinized for signs of hope or further escalation. Canada, Mexico, the EU, and China are all poised for further retaliation if the US doesn't change course. These nations have already begun preparing countermeasures, drafting new tariffs and trade restrictions that could ripple through global markets. The threat of tit-for-tat escalation looms large, and alliances are being tested as each country seeks to protect its own interests. The risk is clear: a global recession, shattered supply chains, and lasting economic damage. Factories could close, jobs may be lost, and the flow of goods that powers modern life could grind to a halt. Investors are on edge, watching markets swing wildly with every new headline. The uncertainty is already being felt in boardrooms and on shop floors around the world. Pressure is mounting on Washington to reverse course as industries and markets reel. American businesses, from small manufacturers to multinational corporations, are sounding the alarm. Workers worry about layoffs, and communities dependent on trade fear for their future. Lawmakers face mounting calls to act before the damage becomes irreversible. There are off-ramps, negotiated concessions, policy reversals, but time is running out. The window for meaningful dialogue is narrowing, and the world is watching to see if leaders will seize the opportunity to step back from the brink. Every hour counts, and the decisions made now will echo for years to come. The lesson is clear: in a globalized world, there are no winners in a trade war. The interconnectedness of modern economies means that pain in one country quickly spreads to others. From factory workers to farmers, from tech giants to small businesses, everyone is affected. Cooperation, not conflict, is the only path to shared prosperity. The world now waits to see if reason will prevail, or if the crisis will deepen. As families gather around their televisions and business leaders scan the horizon for signs of change, the sense of anticipation is palpable. The choices made in the days ahead will determine not just the outcome of this trade war, but the future of global cooperation itself.